Thank you very much. Kind of for those of you who want to tune out and read emails or whatever during my talk, I'll summarize it in a sentence. I think as a community, we got software quality completely wrong because we're wasting time collecting the wrong data. And we should be investing that time collecting some much more useful data. I think there are plenty of stories I can tell you about what happens when people collect the wrong data and publish them in the wrong way. For example, IRS, the American tax service, in 2007 decided to collect detailed information on how many people avoid taxes and published those things. And then as a result of that increased the fines. And in 2008, there was a 22% increase in fraud. Because people said, oh, look at how many people are kind of not paying their taxes. Why am I paying taxes here? So that's what can happen if you publish your bug list. That's what happens if you track bugs. And you can do almost anything with data that you want. For example, let's do a quick survey. So who's seen a stupid unicorn at this conference? Okay, so kind of based on that, I can put the data into my Excel spreadsheet and I can tell you that, during this conference, the result of a quick survey is that everybody spotted the unicorn, and then what's going to happen is somebody tomorrow is going to publish this in a newspaper and say, well, unicorns exist in real life. Plenty of them have been spotted in Potsdam. So, and you'll get Gartner and IDC, doing these things. And I'm not joking about this. For example, this is from a true IDC research where you can, you can download this. I'll publish the slides. You can go there. You can see it's not a fake slide. And what they talk about here is the majority of respondents are separating software testing from development. And there's 47% of companies in Europe that are separating it. There's 32%. There's a pie chart, and there's one another diagram with the same data to convince you more. And this looks very convincing. We can do anything with data we want. I was at a conference where there was a lady from IDC who presented this, and everybody applauded. It's like, yay, we're doing the right thing. Fucking not. So it's I went on stage straight after this lady who presented. I said, look, this is all fine, but think about it this way. If you're doing the same thing as 90% of other people, you have no competitive advantage over them. So why on earth would you want to do these things? The fact that 90% of people are doing this doesn't make it right. So, and I said, we can do almost anything we want with data if we present it in the wrong way. And what's even worse is teams that I've worked with, and I myself have lost a horrible amount of time collecting the wrong kind of data that served no useful purpose. So that's what I kind of want to inspire you to think about today. For example, this is page 10 of my previous book on specification by example. And for this book, I worked with a publisher who had a very interesting process that was quite error-prone. And because it took about 11 months from the point when I thought the book was finished, and I told them, like, this is finished. Here's a manuscript. I've done everything I want. Go and publish it. It took about 11 months to the point when I said, this book is never coming out. I'm canceling the contract. And they panicked and they said, no, we're going to get it out quick. And I said, I've lost all confidence in this. Either get it out next week or we're canceling the contract. And I ended up being in the role of those customers that I complained about all the time, that tell people skip testing, go to production, then when it goes to production, blows up, they complain. Because the minute I got this book, I looked at page number 10, and on page number 10 you will see there's a part of a sentence kind of ending in the middle of the word and another sentence starting. And I said, this is horrible. I mean, this is page number 10. How could you do this to me? It's, people are going to look at this and say, Gojko doesn't speak any English, which is kind of true, but still, not good to have in print. And page number 13, something similar. Page number 25, something similar. So there's a picture covering a part of Word. So I said, this is, if the purpose of the book is to be read, and you cannot read a part of a sentence, that's kind of a priority one problem for me. And I sent them an angry email. They said, don't worry. And I got really angry. And I sent them another angry email. I got another email back, don't worry about this. And I decided to kind of collect this to have more proof. So I started reading my book very, very carefully. I spent about a month and a half of my life, 2 hours a day, reading the book very, 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 very carefully. And I found 27 places where you cannot read a part of a word. That's priority one. I found 74 places where they have changed the meaning of what I wanted to say. So there's a sentence there that looks like I'm bashing selenium, and I got several emails from people saying, why don't you like selenium? And it's like, it's not me. It's I can show you the original manuscript. It says something completely different. And I found 58 places where they've not really changed the meaning, but they've made it more difficult to understand. So kind of priority 3 thing. So this was my list of bugs. I've spent a month and a half, 2 hours a day collecting these bugs, and I sent it to them, and I got another email saying, don't worry about this. And I got really pissed off, and I sent a couple of escalation emails and things like that, and I got an email from, I said, can I talk to an adult, really? I mean, what is, what's going on here? And I got back an email like, don't worry about this, look at Amazon. And on Amazon at that point, there were kind of 21 5-star reviews. There was nobody complaining. If you look at the page now, there is actually a 1-star review. Somebody said a week ago that they expected a book on specifications, but they got something on TDD and Agile principles, and what the fuck does that have to do with anything? So there was a very disappointed reader, obviously, but most people didn't really mind, and that person didn't complain about my 27 priority 1 bugs. Nobody noticed this. So my takeaway from this thing is that I've wasted a month and a half of my life cataloging things that nobody cared about, cataloging things that are not that important, that I have declared priority 1. And since I started noticing this, I've noticed many, many teams that basically are wasting their lives cataloging bugs that nobody cares about, cataloging things, caring about them, putting them in a bug tracking tool to get forgotten, to get resurrected, to get marked as non-reproducible, to get marked as, whatever, and then you end up saying that there's 74 critical issues, but we still went live. So they're not that critical. So, and I think a lot of what I've done there is focused on the wrong things. And if we kind of look at the famous Agile testing quadrants published by Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory, I was focusing on a completely wrong thing. I was focusing on this part here, where what I should have really focused on is this part here. And I've collected lots of data that was all about the production process. I've not collected any data about the product itself, which was kind of an eye-opener for me. And then I started looking at kind of, why have I done it? Why is my mindset like that? And I realized that lots of people do it because what we perceive, even in development, as kind of linear processes. Lots of diagrams that show process in software are linear. There's a cycle here, but essentially the limit of this is delivery. The end is the potentially shippable product. Our feedback is here. And this thing here is very, 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 very linear. So I've realized I'm not really collecting any data about what happens here. And as testers, I think, and anybody responsible about quality on a team, we need to kind of start feeding back this loop as well. There needs to be some feedback about, is this thing really good? Is it doing well in the market? Is it achieving what we wanted it to achieve? Because maybe if it does, then those 27 things we claim are critical are not that critical. Maybe we are wasting time. Maybe we could have invested some time in something more useful. And as the current trends in the industry are to have less and less time to deliver, then it's going to be even more important not to waste time on stuff that doesn't really matter. So, going back to this thing, I said I wasn't really doing any of this stuff, but then I realized that this stuff doesn't belong here at all. We got this quadrant completely wrong. completely wrong, because all this stuff is giving us information about the production process. Exploratory testing is telling me whether I'm producing software. Am I producing the software in the right way? It's not really telling me that the product is performing well in the market. It's not critiquing the product, it's critiquing the process. Bugs we find during exploratory testing are telling me that the process was wrong. Either the requirements or they were misunderstood or whatever, but the process is wrong. It's not telling me that the product is right or wrong. User acceptance testing, this is all before delivery. We are not doing, or none of the people I've worked with until I've realized this were doing any testing after delivery. So, and how can you critique the product if not by its performance in the field? All this stuff are kind of assumptions. Somebody told me that Elizabeth Hendrickson did a keynote at CAST, and she talked about spec by example as speculation by example, not specification by example. I've watched the video and I've not really seen that part. Maybe I've kind of skipped over it. But I think, you know, like anything that woman says, it's incredibly smart. And there's, you know, there's a lot of kind of insight in that. And I think any kind of requirements are just speculations. We do this because we think it's going to make money, or we think it's going to improve the way Google indexes our sites, or we think that this is going to reduce risk. But it's just pure speculation. We do not know for certain that this is going to happen. And I think a lot of kind of critiquing the product from a business perspective needs to be to understand, did that thing really happen or not? And very, very few people I work with actually have any data to show that. So unless we're doing that, these are all assumptions. If the system passes my exploratory testing, it's still an assumption that it's the right system. The only way we can actually prove that it is if we roll it out. So there's kind of, the question is then, how do we start proving this and how do we start looking at this? And one thing that's really interesting for me is we need to stop thinking about the process being linear. The process is really cyclic. Kind of the open and keynote had kind of lots of phases, but then the last one was release. And the release doesn't happen on the end. I mean, at least for none of the teams I work with, there is no single end release. It's a continuous kind of releasing process. And we kind of still think about the process in a linear way, instead of thinking that there's a third wheel we need to add there. And a third wheel is going to inform us, are we actually moving those business goals the way are we moving towards the business goal or not? So I think kind of, you know, the two wheels on the Scrum diagram miss this kind of business feedback part that as a community we have to put in. So my challenge to you for the next year is try and put in this third wheel into your process. Figure out what that is. Figure out how to do it. I don't claim to have the answers to this. This is kind of, I'm trying to present a problem, but figure out how to put this kind of business feedback to figure out, was this thing the right thing to do? Can we inform better decision making so that we are better in the future? And kind of the, what I think we have in terms of software quality practices at the moment is kind of something like those bots dots that are kind of, while we're driving, informing us that we are in the right lane. This is kind of a lot of automation. This is test-driven development, acceptance test-driven development, whatever. And we have this kind of seatbelt so that we prevent ourselves from falling through the window if something really, really bad happens, or kind of limiting the risk of things. So a lot of exploratory testing, user acceptance testing, things like that go there. But these two things alone are not enough for us to understand that our driving is successful. With a lot of kind of car driving today, we use these things as well. And these things are telling us that we are going in the right direction. These things are telling us that we are going to get to the destination at the point where we need to, or find an alternative route because the road is blocked. These things are helping us figure out this kind of post-deployment thing. While we're driving, are we driving in the right direction? And they're not about limiting risk. They're not about staying in the lane. They're about helping us focus where we want to go next. So I think what we're really missing, where the kind of third quadrant of Agile testing quadrants should be, is this thing. And we're missing that. We're missing something that is telling us we are 17 kilometers from the destination, because nobody knows what the destination is. Most of the software teams I worked with, when you ask them, like, what business change is this software going to produce? No idea. And how do you know that then you're driving in the right direction then? And a lot of people are going to say now, well, you know, the stuff we push through the pipeline, it's too small to create a business change. But that's because we are planning it the wrong way. It's the same thing as designing for testability and releasing software that wasn't designed for testability. Of course, if you think about a huge legacy system that wasn't planned for testability, there's no way to test it properly. But we've learned that as you build your system, if you build testability in, then you can absolutely see whether it's going the right direction or not. So one of the strangest stories I've heard while interviewing people for the Spec by Example book was this team from a price comparison site in the UK that had a lot of automated tests, but the first time those tests passed, they disabled them. That was really strange. It seemed kind of doesn't make sense. Why on earth, if you've invested time in doing these things, why on earth would you disable them? And they said, well, you know, the only reason why you would keep running tests after they pass for the first time is to prevent regression. And we have cheaper and faster ways of preventing regression. We use the test to make sure that we've done the right thing, but then from then on, you know, we prevent regression using other ways. I said, okay, that's strange, you know, tell me what you're doing. And they said, well, we have really good business metrics. And with every user story, our users have to give us how the business metrics change. So what we will do is we'll deploy a user story to a part of our system and we will measure the change. If the change is going in the right direction, we keep deploying. If the change is going in the wrong direction, this was a mistake. So they have much better, cheaper, faster ways of preventing regression, but also they have a GPS navigator. They know where they want to go and they can see whether the turn they've taken is the right one or not. Is it bringing us closer to the destination or further away? If all the tests pass, if all the technical stuff passes, all the acceptance tests, exploratory tests, but we're still going in the wrong direction, this is wrong. And kind of when we go back to kind of this, one thing that I think we need to stop thinking about as a community is that bugs are any kind of useful measurement. Because bugs are just an indicator of health of a system. And the absence of bugs is not in any way telling us that we have the presence of quality. I can have 0 bugs, but the system can be useless. And the presence of bugs is at the same time an indicator, very much like blood pressure is an indicator of human health. So if I have high blood pressure, I'm unlikely to be healthy. But I can reduce my blood pressure immediately by chopping my head off. That doesn't mean that I'll get any healthier. So a lot of teams do the same thing. A lot of teams kind of chop their head off by wasting a horrible amount of time on things that don't make sense to reduce the number of bugs artificially, where at the same time they strangle their product. So in order to avoid that, we need to be able to define our GPS navigator. We need to be able to define the destination and then measure the distance to destination from a business perspective. And that becomes our ultimate measure of quality. Then, you know, if the book is selling well on Amazon and if people are writing good reviews about it, the fact that it has 27 priority 1 bugs doesn't really matter. Collecting those things, cataloging them is a waste of time. So kind of we need to kind of go back and think about what we measure and how we measure it. And one thing I really like is kind of the Maslow model of human needs, because it shows different ways of coming to kind of the quality of human life. Maslow was a psychologist, I think in the 40s, who was trying to understand why do people try to make a lot of money, and then when they succeed in making a lot of money, they're still not happy. And that's a very, very simplified version of his research. There's a lot more to that, but yeah. So one of the things he came up with is this model of human needs that explains different levels of what people need at different times. And as any other model, it is not correct, but it is useful for some things. And it was particularly useful to explain this problem. And he said, humans have needs on several levels. On the bottom level, we have physiological needs. I need to have enough air to breathe. I need to have enough water to drink. But at the same time, he said, after a while, when you satisfy these needs, more is not better. More air than I need is not increasing my quality of life. More water than I need is a flood. That's actually bad. He said, on top of that, you have safety needs. You need to be physically secure, financially secure, and things like that. But again, more is not necessarily better. Look at what they're doing at airports now. So on top of that is love and belonging and self-esteem and self-actualization. The purpose of the model is to show that if the things on the bottom are not satisfied, we will not care about the things on the top. So if I don't have enough water to drink, my self-esteem is going out of the window immediately. And I'm not going to care a lot about love and belonging. But he said that as you satisfy these levels, more is not necessarily better. We need to start doing some other things. And working with a client that's a big media company in the UK, they needed to reverse engineer 10 years of QTP tests that nobody could understand and figure out what to do with that. And we said, there's plenty of things you could test for. Let's figure out that we're not over-investing. And we created an equivalent of this model for them. So I'm not claiming that what I'll show you applies to everybody. This applied to one client in their context. It might or might not inspire you to do something similar, but here's what applies to them. So we said on the bottom level, what are the physiological needs of our software? So we said, well, it has to be deployable and it has to be functionally okay. If it's not functionally okay, and if it's not deployable, the other stuff doesn't really matter. But once we've built it to be deployable enough, because these guys wanted to deploy every 3 weeks, once we built it to be deployable every 3 weeks, investing more in deployment optimization is a waste of time. Once we've built it to be functionally okay, testing more or investing more in more functionality is a waste of time. I mean, look at Microsoft Word, for example. It's gotten, 10,000 new features over the last couple of years, but even that ribbon thing that makes me not able to print documents anymore, so I feel really stupid when I use it. So more functionality is not necessarily good. Then we said, well, what would relate to security and safety and things like that? Well, security and things like that. So if it works, does it work well? So he said on top of this, we have performant and we have secure, we have things like that. But again, more performance is not necessarily good if we are good enough. I've worked with a startup where we've wasted a lot of time and money building a system to we tested it to scale to about 1 million users concurrently. At the end of the first year, they had 500 users in peak time. At the end of the second year, they had 2,000. So the fact that we over-engineered it to support 1 million users, it's a waste of time. What we could have done is we could have built it to 2,000 users and then invested a lot more time in doing something more important, both from a testing and development perspective. So the level above this, on the Maslow pyramid, is love and belonging. And so, well, this is where usability really fits in. Do our users love our software? And again, the model tells us that enough is enough here, and you should look for more things there. For example, look at Twitter. Twitter is famous for performance problems. It's running to its performance limit all the time. So performance is just good enough. But it's really usable and people love it. So they've figured this out, that over-investing in this, and I'm sure they could have invested more money in performance testing. I'm sure they could have invested more money in performance optimizations, but my hope is that they've done this smart. I've not worked there. My hope is that they've done this smart and realized that if it's performant enough, let's invest money in something else. So, but Maslow has 2 more levels there. And we're trying to figure out, this pretty much relates to the testing they were doing in terms of most of their investment was in functional testing, very kind of small portion of their investment was performance, and even less was in usability. And we said, well, maybe we should start reversing this thing a bit, because upper levels are more important. But then we said, there are 2 more levels on the Maslow pyramid. Could we map this thing to software somehow? And we said, well, software can be usable, but is it really useful? Are people actually using it? And we had this thing where one of my clients, they called us in to help them figure out how to reduce a 4-week testing phase so that it can fit into a 3-week delivery cycle. So mathematically, you can't really fit 4 weeks of testing into 3 weeks of delivery. So it doesn't really work like that. And we said, instead of automating all of these things, let's figure out what part of the system is actually being used. Because the part that's not being used, who cares about problems there? Who cares about maintenance there? And instead of just going to rewrite all these tests and automate them, they've put in some metrics and they've measured the percentage of the system that was actually used. And again, I'm not claiming any statistical relevance of this, but for this particular system, after about 3 months of measurements, they realized that 70% of the system is never touched. This was built over 15 years, legacy, ideas changed. Writing, maintaining tests, rewriting, automating, maintaining software for that 70% is pointless. And but then again, there's one more level of this pyramid. And that reminded me very much of the famous Hoover airline tickets promotions program. So I think in 1992, Hoover, the vacuum cleaning company, had a promotion where if you buy a vacuum cleaner, they will give you a free airline ticket. This is a fantastic case study. You can Google for this. There's lots of data on this. And what happened is that they were actually promising people to buy intercontinental tickets as well. And people in the UK went crazy. They bought lots and lots of vacuum cleaners to get tickets to the States that were actually much more expensive than the vacuum cleaner itself. So this was fantastically useful. Users loved it. They were using it. The usage exceeded all expectations. The UK part of the company actually went bust. The European arm was then sold to Candy, that's I think an Italian company with they took about 50 million pounds of damage. And there's Wikipedia says so, whether you can trust Wikipedia or not, but Wikipedia says then when people opened up the factory that was closed in Wales, they found about 100 boxes of customer complaints. And the customers took them to court, and the whole thing dragged on until 1998. So there was about 6 years of legal battles for this company. So they built something that was fantastically usable, fantastically useful, but a horrible business failure. So I think the self-actualization part of the Maslow pyramid relates to business success in software. And I think it's these 2 levels that we're not measuring. Or very few teams that I've worked at are measuring. I'm not saying that you guys are not that smart. Maybe you are measuring these things. But when I started talking to people about these things, nobody knew what these 2 levels are. What do you expect with this user story? How do you expect people to actually use it? What's business success for this thing? And how do we know that we've done the right thing? So that's why I think we need to stop wasting time collecting data here when we get to a good enough point. I'm not saying don't make your software functionally okay. Go and do that. But then once you've done that, other things become more important. And as we are starting to shrink delivery phases more and more, we need to figure out how do we move on to this part here. Going back to the GPS, everybody measures kilometers per hour. This is our velocity. People are overly obsessed with velocity in software. We have 40 story points, yay! And then next week we have 20 story points, oh! And then we increase it to 60 because we fudged the way how we calculate points, yay! And this is all brilliant. But it's not really telling us that we're moving any closer to the goal. And we need to figure out these two things. We need to figure out how do we see the distance to destination, the time it takes to get there, and we need to figure out where is our next turn. Because that's also useful as well. If I want to do iterations, I want to know that I'm hitting my next turn first, and then I want to know that that turn was the right one. So I started doing a bit of research on how to deliver training to organizations, because I do a lot of training and things like that. And there's one fantastic book that I found that was published in 1991 by Robert Brinkenhoff, who basically was annoyed by the fact that large American corporations waste a horrible amount of money on training that creates no big benefits to any company. And he said, well, a lot of money is wasted because we measure the effectiveness of training completely wrong. We measure the wrong things. People measure that with feedback forms, have you enjoyed this training? Will this improve your performance at work and whatever? And people were happy and therefore the trainings got sold. He says, this is completely wrong because it's not creating any useful information. It's not telling us about the real performance in the field. It's telling us something about the production process. And he had this fantastic idea that it took me about 6 months to understand. He said that the key point where they got this wrong in terms of training, and I think we got it wrong in software as well, is that we are considering the jobs that people do. For example, if you have salespeople, you send them on sales training. If you have testers, you send them on an Agile testing course. Or, God forbid, some certification somewhere. So he said this is completely wrong because this is how we waste money without any effect, or kind of the effect is completely random. What we should be doing is not considering the jobs. We should be considering the impact on those jobs that we want to create. So he said, kind of, if you have testers, think about what is the impact on their work that you want to create, and then measure the effectiveness of training against that impact. Has that impact occurred or not? And there, if it has, then bring those people again to train your company. If not, then this was a waste of time. It doesn't matter if everybody liked it, but the business effect is not there. So kind of relating that back to software, I think we got user stories slightly wrong. Because most of the user stories are, in order to achieve something as a blah, 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 I want this and that. But it's very, very rarely do I see people talking about a change in the way people do things. So I started making people, instead of telling me in order to process important exceptions, tell me what's going to be different in the way you process important exceptions. And what's really, really interesting about that is if you talk about a difference, that opens up a discussion on measurements. If we talk about, well, we want to process important exceptions, we have 5 trillion ways of measuring that. But if we talk about processing important exceptions faster, then we open up a discussion, well, how faster? And we can measure whether the thing really happened or not. So we can start thinking about, well, was this user story the right thing to do? Has it moved us? Was this turn? A user story, kind of going back to the GPS, is like the next turn. Has this turn turned us in the right direction or not? And again, lots of people will be able to complain that a single user story is not going to create any big business difference, but that's because we're planning it that way. If we were planning things to create business impact, we would do that by design. Since I started doing this, I've done this with a couple of really big banks. I've done this with an insurance company and a media company. And in every single case, we were able to then figure out how do we do something relatively simple that proves that this thing was the right thing to do. And the next turn could be literally proving that this thing was the right thing to do. Then we go and implement it, or slicing it the way that kind of would move it in the right way. So, and I started giving people cards like this when they give me, requirements. I said, well, fill in cards like this, because we have this kind of user story that's the next turn, but where is our destination? Where's the overall thing? Where do we want to get? And I started getting people to tell me, like, somebody can help us achieve something by doing something faster, better, worse, obstructing us and things like that. So we can see the destination there as well. We can start measuring the next turn and the destination. And this allows us to actually critique the product. I'm not saying exploratory testing is not good. It's a fantastically good technique. But it's not really critiquing the product. It's more kind of in the other part. And we are missing the kind of third quadrant stuff completely. We should be testing the product. Because then we can say, the last 5 user stories you gave us were not that good. Are you sure you want to do the 6th one as well? Or we can say, this guy is giving us really good user stories, let's work with him more. Because that's how you make money, or something like that. So we can start reducing scope creep quite significantly. We can start measuring whether we've hit the right destination. And you know, if it turns out that we are moving much faster than we expected in the right direction, we can stop when we reach the destination, not when we've done all the user stories we plan to do. So kind of one takeaway from this thing today is that understanding the needed impacts really kind of captures objectives relatively nicely. So if you need a nice acronym to remember this, here it is. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. Here's my new book, and you can read more about this topic on either impactmapping.org or my website. I have no idea how I'm doing for time, so do we have time for questions or not? This one. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Where's the, oh, you have to talk to Mike. He has all the rainbow unicorns. That's now patented. If I showed you that, I could get sued in Texas for patent infringement or...
So, questions, my dears?
Okay.
So I had a client that was asking me to write bugs during the sprint.
Asking you to what?
To write bugs, bug
Write
reports
bugs,
for
okay.
every bug we would find during the sprint.
Okay.
So I told him, what's the use of this? Do you want us to write bugs for unit tests that fail as well? Where do we stop? And then he had a whole story about how important measurements on the number of bugs were. And I told him, if you can give me the number of bugs that come back from production, then it would be a lot more useful because it would actually tell us where our process fails. So would that kind of bug metrics be interesting?
I don't know. It depends on the context. So kind of the bugs are, for me, if something does not come through the production line, it's not really a bug. It was caught during development. So, or during delivery. So kind of the bugs coming from production are bad if they are damaging your business. Bugs coming back from production that are not damaging anybody's usefulness or business are our interpretation of criticalness. I mean, I've worked with plenty of teams where the testers decided what's priority one. And that was their decision based on their gut feel, which, you know, might or might not make sense. I don't know. It's a lot of times I think, even if you talk to business people, you'll get different opinions. If you talk to somebody from accounting and there's a bug in the accounting part of the system, they will claim it's priority one. If you go and talk to somebody who's managing video players and there's a bug in the video player, they will claim it's priority one. The question is, how do we kind of decide which one of these two things is really priority one? And we need to get them to agree. And you know, one good way of getting them to agree is, you know, is this, do we have any destination kind of posts there, and are we going further or closer to the destination because of these bugs? So, you know, I guess like anything else, it depends on the context. But what I was trying to say at the start of the talk is that just collecting data doesn't make sense if it's not the right kind of data, because you can conclude anything from data that's the wrong kind of data. So, you know, that all depends on the context, I guess.
Okay, thanks.
More questions?
We have a question there. So.
In the pyramid that you have described, everything starts from functionality and deployability. But at first place, when someone implements a product, he thinks that it will be useful and it's needed. Should that be the first one behind the functionality? Like if you know, you don't think that it will be useful, you are not going to even start implementing it.
I would love to agree with you, but that doesn't comply with my experience. I've seen people producing useless crap all the time. So I think, you know, it would be fantastic if you were right. But what most people do is kind of overly focus on this part there. I think the Maslow model actually is telling you that once you have enough of this, it needs to be useful. And then the real question is how enough is enough? If you can make it useful with 2 functions of Java code, do that instead of over-investing in functionality. So if you can make it useful without building any software, brilliant. But that's probably then a business development conference, not a software conference team. So I think, you know, for me and I assume a lot of people in this room, we get to usefulness through building software. So if there's no software there, that's really not our job. It's somebody else's job. So, but you know, if you can do it with the least amount of software possible, that's better.
Thank you.
More questions?
We have one more question there. It might, if you're checking whether you are actually reaching your targets and improving. So, you know, what these guys were doing is actually A/B testing on production. They would release a user story. They would see the differences between that part of the system and this other part of the system, and then decide whether the user story was right or not. So, it fits in perfectly with A/B testing if you're testing for business outcomes. I don't know. I mean, some people might not. I don't know. So I think my realization out of trying to create this talk is that I think exploratory testing is showing us the quality of the process, not the product. In at least in the projects that I was involved in, because the quality, you know, critiquing the product is really post-deployment world. So maybe you need 2 more, I don't know. Maybe you need 1 more. Maybe we need a hexagonal cube of all the testing types. But again, you know, the Agile testing quadrants, like any other model, it's wrong, but it's useful for a particular purpose. So, you know, if it's not useful for your purpose, create an, you know, I showed people an Agile testing donut last conference. That might be more useful than the quadrants in some cases. In some cases, it's less useful, so.
More questions?
Okay, so we have Gaspar over there.
I think I was thinking also about this pyramid, and I think I have a mic. And it makes sense. Unfortunately, it's not, especially the upper part is not so easy to, I think typically the problem is that maybe you even get to the point of the usefulness, but at that point you cannot make too much for the successfulness maybe. So if you really went to a wrong direction, maybe you built up free software and then you got to the top and it's super useful but never make any business out of that or whatever. So I think even though that it makes sense, sometimes it's not enough to think in this level. So you have to see it up front that somewhere at the end I want to have success as well.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's what I'm saying. If we build our systems intending to measure these 2 top levels, we will build it for testability. We will build it in a way that we run development in a way that we can actually measure are we going in the right direction or not. I think it's absolutely the same if you think about unit testing and this thing in terms of design. If you build a system to be unit testable in the first place, it is very, very easy. If you're thinking about something that was built in COBOL on a mainframe without thinking about unit testing, it might be nearly impossible to do that. So I think, you know, my message for today was think about the 2 upper levels and think about how you're going to test them and design your software in a way that makes it easy to test these things. And, you know, that's going to make you talk to people and understand, get them to agree on this thing as well. From my experience, it's very, very difficult to get these people to actually start agreeing on what success means. But it's a very powerful thing to actually do. And then if we can define that, we'll get into a much better place.
Okay, the last question.
So doesn't your impact mapping idea suffer from the problem of local optimization? When you stop going into one direction, as soon as you see that you're not making money now, you stop going any further. But maybe for the next step, you could like do a good business. How do you deal with that?
So first of all, possibly. Again, impact mapping is a relatively new idea. It has limitations I don't even know about. So it's up to you guys to test it and tell me, well, it doesn't work in my context because of this, this, and that. So the second thing is, I think you need to plan by cutting your losses at some point. So you can decide how much money and time you're going to invest in making a particular branch of the map work. And if it fails the first time around, you can keep trying that until you've spent your learning budget. When you've spent your learning budget, I think you have to cut your losses. So yes, it does suffer from local optimization in the sense that if you run out of money, you stop it. But I think that's kind of risk management planning. So the question is, how much risk are you willing to take? And that's why kind of the learning budget is important as an idea discussed up front, because that's everybody's agreement on how much money are we going to spend on this. So, you know, if you run out of money, you run out of money. If you can prove it in less money, then, you know, you've proven it. So, but possibly, I mean, okay. Thank you very much. It's alcohol time.
Thank you very much.